Daniel Mercer had spent most of his career chasing stories that other people ignored, lost legends, forgotten crimes, places that existed only in rumors. Most of the time those stories led nowhere, but every once in a while, one of them revealed something extraordinary. On a cold autumn afternoon, Daniel was driving through a remote region of northern England. Heavy rain hammered the windshield. The narrow road twisted through hills covered in thick fog. His original destination was a historical archive in another town. But the weather forced him to stop. That was when he noticed a small antique shop standing alone beside the road. The building looked ancient. Its stone walls were dark with age. A faded wooden sign swung in the wind. The words were barely visible. Mercer's Antiques. Daniel parked his car and stepped inside. A bell rang above the door. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. Rows of shelves stretched into the shadows. Ancient clocks ticked softly. Stacks of books leaned against each other. Paintings hung crookedly on the walls. The entire shop felt frozen in time. An elderly man appeared from behind a shelf. His grey hair was thin. His face carried deep wrinkles. Yet his eyes seemed unusually alert. "Looking for anything specific?" the man asked. Daniel smiled, just waiting for the rain to ease. The old man nodded. Sometimes people find what they weren't looking for. The comment seemed strange, but Daniel ignored it. He wandered through the crowded aisles. Most of the items were ordinary antiques. Old coins, vintage cameras, handwritten letters, nothing unusual. Then something caught his eye. A leather tube sat alone on a shelf. The leather was cracked with age. Daniel pulled it free. Inside was a rolled piece of yellowed parchment. Carefully he unrolled it. It was a map, not a printed map, a hand-drawn one. The ink had faded. The paper looked incredibly old. Daniel immediately noticed how detailed it was. Rivers, forests, roads, mountains. Everything had been drawn with remarkable precision. Then he saw the red circle. Near the center of the map, someone had marked a location with bright red ink. Beside it were two words, Black Hollow. Daniel studied the map. The name meant nothing to him, yet something about it felt familiar, as if he had heard it before. The feeling disappeared almost immediately. He carried the map to the counter. "Where did this come from?" he asked. The old shopkeeper looked at the parchment. For a brief moment his expression changed, almost as if he recognized it. Then the expression vanished. "An estate sale," he replied. "Whose estate? I don't remember." Daniel sensed the man wasn't telling the whole truth. Still, he continued examining the map. It fascinated him. "How much?" The old man named a surprisingly low price. Daniel paid without hesitation. Shopkeeper carefully wrapped the map. As he handed it over, he spoke quietly. "You should be careful with that." Daniel laughed. "It's only an old map." The old man didn't laugh back. His eyes remained fixed on the parchment. That's what others thought. A chill ran through Daniel. "What others?" The shopkeeper looked away. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Daniel waited for more explanation. None came. The conversation ended there. Outside, the rain had weakened. Daniel returned to his car. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The old man was standing in the doorway, watching him, not waving, not moving, just watching. Hours later, Daniel arrived home. The first thing he did was spread the map across his desk. He spent nearly an hour studying every detail. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The landmarks appeared real. The roads seemed accurate. Everything suggested the map represented an actual location. Yet Black Hollow remained unfamiliar. Daniel opened his laptop. He searched modern maps. Nothing. He searched historical records. Nothing. He checked government databases. Nothing. No town, no village, no settlement. Nothing called Black Hollows existed anywhere in the region. That should have ended the mystery. Instead, it made the map even more interesting. Daniel continued, searching long into the night. Every result led nowhere. Every database returned the same answer. Black Hollow did not exist. Shortly after midnight, he finally leaned back in his chair. The room was silent. Only the ticking of a wall clock broke the darkness. Then something caught his attention. The map. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a faint shadow crossing the parchment. Daniel blinked. The shadow was gone. He stared at the map. Nothing moved. The room remained still. Eventually, he convinced himself it was exhaustion. He rolled the map and placed it beside his desk. Then he went to bed. Sleep came slowly. One question refused to leave his mind. If Black Hollow had never existed, why had someone gone to such extraordinary lengths to draw a map leading directly to it? Daniel woke early the next morning. The question from the night before was still on his mind. Black Hollow, a town that appeared on a detailed map, a town that did not exist. After breakfast, he returned to his desk. The map lay exactly where he had left it. Sunlight poured through the window. For the first time, he noticed tiny handwritten notes along the edges of the parchment. Most were faded beyond recognition, but one sentence remained readable. Some roads are forgotten for a reason. Daniel stared at the words. They appeared to have been written by someone other than the mapmaker. The handwriting was different, almost hurried, almost fearful. He photographed the map and sent copies to several historians he knew. Then he began making calls. By noon, one of the historians returned his call. Her name was Margaret Ellis. She specialized in local folklore and lost settlements. "I've never heard of Black Hollow," she admitted, "but something about that name bothers me." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. "I feel like I've seen it somewhere. Give me a day." The call ended. Daniel spent the afternoon searching through old newspaper archives. Hours passed without results. Then he found something unusual, a small article from 1978. The article reported the disappearance of a schoolteacher named Arthur Bell. The story itself was ordinary. Missing person. No suspects, no evidence. But one detail caught Daniel's attention. According to the article, Bell's final known possession was an old hand-drawn map. The article included a photograph. The image was blurry. Yet Daniel immediately recognized the red circle. It was the same map. His pulse quickened. He continued digging. Another disappearance surfaced. A photographer in 1994, missing without explanation. Again, investigators listed an antique map among his belongings. Then a third case. A retired surveyor, vanished in 2008. The same map appeared in evidence photographs. Daniel sat back in his chair. 3 unrelated disappearances. 3 different decades. One common object. The map. That could not be a coincidence. Late that evening, his phone rang again. "Margaret Ellis, I found something." Daniel grabbed a notebook. "What is it?" There was an old legend recorded in the 19th century. "A legend about Black Hollow?" "Yes." Daniel felt a surge of excitement. Margaret continued. "The story claimed there was once a town hidden somewhere beyond the northern valleys. A real town? No one knows. What happened to it?" There was a pause. "According to the legend, the town disappeared." Daniel frowned. "Disappeared? Not abandoned, not destroyed. Disappeared." The word hung in the air, Margaret continued. "Local villagers claimed roads leading there would sometimes appear and disappear." Daniel remembered the warning written on the map. Some roads are forgotten for a reason. "What else?" he asked. "The records are incomplete. Most references vanished over time." "Vanished how?" "Removed." Daniel sat upright. "Removed by who? I don't know. Government officials? Possibly." The answer raised more questions than it solved. The next morning, Daniel drove to meet Margaret in person. She worked in a small historical society, housed inside an old stone building. Stacks of books surrounded her office. Ancient documents filled cabinets. Margaret was already waiting when he arrived. Without speaking, she handed him a thin folder. Inside were photocopies of old records. Daniel flipped through them. Most were fragments, half-finished reports, damaged letters, journal entries. Then he found a name. Black Hollow. His heart skipped. It was the first official reference he had seen. The document dated back to 1883. Only part of the page survived. The remaining text read, "Travelers continue reporting sightings of the settlement known as Black Hollow. Authorities recommend avoiding the northern route until further notice." The page ended there. The rest was missing. Daniel looked up. "That's all?" Margaret nodded. "Unfortunately. Why are so many records incomplete?" Margaret hesitated. "That's the strange part." "What?" "Most of the missing pages were deliberately removed." Daniel stared at her. "Removed? Cut out." A chill spread through him. Someone had spent decades erasing information, not accidentally, intentionally. That evening, Daniel returned home carrying copies of every document. As he entered his house, something felt wrong. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. Everything appeared normal. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling. Inside, he walked directly to his office. Then he froze. The map was no longer where he had left it. Daniel's stomach tightened. He approached the desk. The map sat in the center, perfectly unrolled. He was absolutely certain he had left it, rolled inside its leather tube. Slowly he examined the room. Nothing else had moved. No signs of forced entry, no missing items, only the map. Then he noticed something else. A small piece of paper rested on top of the parchment. Daniel had never seen it before. With trembling fingers he picked it up. A single sentence was written in faded black ink. The handwriting matched the warning on the map. It read, "Stop searching before the road finds you." Daniel stared at the message. The room suddenly felt much colder. And for the first time since buying the map, he began to wonder if someone was watching him. Daniel barely slept that night. The message remained on his desk. He had examined it dozens of times. The paper was old. The ink appeared decades old. Yet it had somehow appeared inside his locked house. No explanation made sense. By sunrise, Daniel had reached a decision. He could spend months studying records and legends, or he could follow the map himself. If Black Hollow existed, he intended to find it. 3 days later, he packed his equipment: cameras, food supplies, a satellite phone, a GPS device, extra batteries, everything necessary for a long journey. Margaret strongly opposed the idea. "You don't know what you're looking for," she warned over the phone. "That's exactly why I have to go." "Daniel, people connected to that map disappeared. Stories and rumors aren't evidence." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she spoke quietly. "Just promise you'll be careful." Daniel promised, but even he knew he was stepping into something unusual. The next morning he began following the route marked on the map. At first everything matched perfectly. The rivers existed. The hills existed. Even the abandoned stone bridge drawn on the parchment stood exactly where it should. The map was astonishingly accurate. That fact alone made the mystery deeper. How could every landmark be real, while the destination itself did not exist? For 2 days, Daniel followed the route. The landscape became increasingly remote. Villages grew smaller. Roads became narrower. Traffic disappeared entirely. By the 3rd day, he was deep within a region few people visited. Tall forests covered the hills. Fog drifted between the trees. The silence felt unnatural. Late that afternoon, he stopped at a tiny village marked on modern maps. The place contained only a handful of houses. An old cafe stood near the road. Daniel entered, hoping to gather information. Several elderly residents sat quietly drinking tea. Conversations stopped when he entered. A strange tension filled the room. Daniel approached the counter. "I'm looking for information about a place called Black Hollow." The woman behind the counter immediately froze. One of the elderly men looked up sharply. Another lowered his eyes. No one spoke. Daniel sensed immediate discomfort. Finally, the woman shook her head. "Never heard of it." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Daniel thanked her and turned to leave. As he reached the door, an elderly man spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You should turn around." Daniel looked back. The man stared into his cup.
Why?
The old man hesitated. Then he said something Daniel would remember forever. "Some places stay hidden because they want to." The cafe fell silent again. Nobody added another word. Daniel left shortly afterward. The encounter only strengthened his determination. By evening, he reached the final confirmed location shown on modern maps. Beyond that point, the antique map became the only guide. A dirt road stretched into a valley. No signs marked the entrance. No indication suggested anything unusual. Yet, according to the parchment, Black Hollow lay somewhere beyond. Daniel continued. The road narrowed further. Dense forest surrounded him. The sun slowly disappeared behind distant hills. Then the first strange thing happened. His GPS stopped working. The screen flickered. Coordinates vanished. Error messages appeared repeatedly. Daniel restarted the device. Nothing changed. Minutes later, his satellite phone lost signal. That was impossible. The device worked in far more remote locations, yet now it displayed nothing. No connection, no network, no signal. A feeling of unease settled over him. The map's route continued toward the center of the valley. As darkness approached, Daniel noticed another problem. Distances no longer matched reality. A hill shown on the map should have been several miles away. Instead, it appeared directly ahead. A stream he had crossed earlier somehow appeared again. The landscape felt wrong, as if locations were shifting around him. Daniel checked the map repeatedly. Each time he became more confused. Nothing made sense. Then he noticed movement. A figure stood among the trees, far away, watching. Daniel stopped walking. The figure remained still, too far away to identify. For several seconds neither moved. Then the fog thickened. The figure vanished. Daniel hurried toward the location. When he arrived, nobody was there. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing, only silence. The forest had swallowed the stranger completely. Night arrived quickly. Daniel set up camp beside the road. A small fire burned near his tent. Normally he enjoyed solitude. Tonight felt different. Every sound seemed amplified. Every movement among the trees captured his attention. Around midnight he awoke suddenly. Someone was walking outside. Slow footsteps circled the tent. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Daniel held his breath. The footsteps continued, one slow circle, then another, then another. He reached for a flashlight. The moment he switched it on, the footsteps stopped. Instantly, the silence became absolute. Daniel unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The fire had nearly died. Fog covered the valley. No one was visible. No movement. Nothing. Yet something caught his eye. Near the edge of the campsite, fresh footprints, a single trail, leading away into the darkness. Daniel followed them with the flashlight. The tracks continued for nearly 50 yards, then suddenly ended. Not faded, not turned, ended, as if whoever made them had simply disappeared. A cold sensation ran through him. He returned to the tent. Sleep never came again. At dawn he packed his equipment and continued deeper into the valley. The map indicated one final landmark ahead. A place marked only with a symbol. No name, no explanation, just a drawing. Hours later he found it. An ancient stone archway hidden among the trees. The structure was covered in moss. Its stones were cracked with age. It looked far older than anything else in the valley. Daniel approached slowly. The air felt different here. He couldn't explain why. Everything seemed quieter. Even the wind had disappeared. Then he noticed something carved into the stone. Words, almost erased by time. He brushed away dirt and moss. The inscription became visible. 3 words, "Welcome to Black Hollow." Daniel stared at the carving. His pulse hammered in his chest. After days of searching, he had finally found proof. Black Hollow was real. But as he stepped closer to the archway, another realization struck him. Beyond the opening, there was no forest. There was a road. And he was absolutely certain that road had not been there a moment earlier. Daniel stood motionless before the stone arch. The road beyond it stretched into the distance. A narrow paved road, clean, well-maintained, completely out of place. Only moments earlier there had been nothing beyond the archway except dense forest. Now an entire road existed where none should have been. Daniel looked behind him. The forest remained unchanged. Birds called from the trees. The morning breeze rustled the leaves. Everything felt normal. Yet beyond the arch, the atmosphere seemed different. Still, silent, waiting. Daniel pulled out his camera and began recording. He documented every detail. The stonework, the inscription, the impossible road. Then he took a cautious step forward. Nothing happened. He took another, and another. The moment he crossed beneath the arch, a sharp tone sounded from his GPS. The screen flashed, then went black. Daniel frowned. He pressed the power button repeatedly. Nothing. The device was dead. A second later, his watch stopped. The hands froze completely. 10:37. Exactly. The satellite phone followed. The screen flickered, then shut down. Every electronic device he carried failed at the same time. A chill moved through him. Daniel slowly turned around. The stone arch still stood behind him, but something had changed. The forest on the other side appeared farther away, much farther, as if the distance had somehow stretched. He blinked. The effect remained. A sense of unease settled in his chest, yet curiosity pushed him forward. The road wound through rolling hills covered in mist. Everything seemed unusually quiet. No birds, no insects, no distant sounds, only silence. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, Daniel noticed structures emerging through the fog. Buildings, roofs, church spires, a water tower, an entire town. His pace slowed. The map had been telling the truth. Black Hollow existed. The town sign appeared first. Old white paint covered weathered wood. The letters were faded. Black Hollow population. 1,274. Daniel stared at the sign. Population. The town wasn't abandoned. People lived here, or at least they once had. He continued toward the town. Rows of houses lined the streets. Flower gardens, decorated front yards, fresh paint-covered fences. Everything appeared maintained, yet something felt wrong. The streets were empty. No children played outside. No cars moved along the roads. No voices echoed from open windows. The town looked alive, but it felt abandoned. As Daniel entered the main street, he finally saw movement. A woman stood outside a bakery. She appeared to be arranging bread in a display window. Daniel approached. "Excuse me." The woman looked up. For a brief second, her face revealed shock, pure shock, as if she had seen a ghost. Then the expression disappeared. "Hello," she said. Her voice sounded cautious. "I'm looking for information about this town." The woman continued staring at him. "You aren't from here." It wasn't a question. "No." The woman's eyes widened slightly. Several people nearby had stopped what they were doing. All of them were watching him. Daniel suddenly felt like an intruder. "How did you get here?" the woman asked. "I followed a road." The woman exchanged a glance with an elderly man standing nearby. Neither looked comfortable. That road shouldn't be open. Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The woman immediately looked away. "I've said too much." Without another word, she walked back into the bakery. The door closed behind her. Daniel remained standing on the sidewalk. Every person nearby quickly returned to whatever they had been doing. Yet he could still feel their eyes following him. As he moved deeper into town, he noticed more oddities. The architecture seemed decades out of date. Storefronts resembled photographs from another era. Cars parked along the streets looked old, very old. Many appeared to belong in the 1960s or 1970s. Some models were even older, yet none showed signs of decay. Everything looked frozen in time. A newspaper caught his attention. Several copies sat outside a small shop. Daniel picked one up. The headline made his blood run cold. The date printed at the top was October 14, 1983. He checked another paper, the same date. A third, again the same. Daniel looked around. Nobody seemed surprised. Nobody seemed confused. It was as though 1983 had never ended. He entered a diner, hoping to find answers. The room fell silent immediately. Conversation stopped. Every customer turned toward him. Daniel forced a smile. "Sorry to interrupt." No one responded. A waitress approached cautiously. She looked nervous, almost frightened. "What would you like?" "A coffee." The waitress nodded. As she poured it, Daniel noticed her hands shaking. "Can I ask you something?" Her expression tightened. "What? What year is it?" The waitress stared at him. For several seconds she didn't answer. Then she spoke. 1983. Daniel's stomach tightened. The answer had come without hesitation, as if it were perfectly normal, as if 43 years had never passed. He paid for the coffee and left. Outside, the fog had grown thicker. The town seemed darker now, more isolated. Daniel walked toward the town square. At its center stood a large statue, a bronze monument depicting several townspeople standing together. An inscription rested beneath it. Daniel stepped closer. His heart began pounding. The monument had been erected in 1983. The dedication read, "To those who remained when the world left us behind." Daniel read the sentence again and again. The words made no sense, yet they filled him with dread. Then he noticed someone standing across the square. A young woman. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't staring at him with fear. She was staring with concern. When their eyes met, she quickly approached. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. Daniel looked around. Nobody seemed close enough to hear. "Who are you?" "My name is Eleanor. You know what's happening here?" Eleanor glanced toward the surrounding buildings, as if afraid someone might be listening. "Not here." "Then where?" "There are people watching." Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. "Watching me? Watching everyone." Her voice dropped even lower. "You need to leave before they find out why you came." Daniel stared at her. "What do you mean?" Eleanor's face turned pale. "Because if they discover you're asking questions," she paused. Then she spoke the words that sent a chill through him. "You'll never find the road home again." Daniel followed Eleanor away from the town square. Neither spoke. The streets of Black Hollow felt unnaturally quiet. People moved about their daily routines. Shopkeepers swept sidewalks. Customers entered stores. Children rode bicycles along side streets. Everything appeared normal. Yet Daniel could feel something beneath the surface. Everyone seemed to be pretending that life was ordinary, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending they weren't watching him. Eleanor led him to a narrow path behind several houses. The route ended at an abandoned greenhouse hidden by overgrown ivy. Broken glass covered the floor. Dust coated every surface. It looked as though nobody had visited in years. Only then did Eleanor stop. "This is the only place where we can talk." Daniel looked around. "Why?" "Because nobody comes here anymore." She checked the doorway before continuing. "Tell me exactly how you arrived." Daniel explained everything. The antique shop, the map, the disappearances, the stone arch, the road. As he spoke, Eleanor's expression grew increasingly serious. When he finished, she remained silent for several moments. Finally, she nodded. "It happened again." Daniel frowned. "What happened again?" "The map found someone." A chill ran through him. "You know about the map?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Everyone here knows about the map." "Then explain it." She hesitated. "I don't know everything." "But you know something." Eleanor looked toward the broken windows. "As children, we were taught never to discuss outsiders." "What outsiders?" "The ones who arrive." Daniel's heartbeat quickened. "Others came here before me?" Eleanor nodded. "Many? How many?" "No one knows." The answer unsettled him. "What happened to them?" Eleanor looked away. "Most never left." The words hung in the air. Daniel remembered the missing people connected to the map. Arthur Bell, the photographer, the surveyor, and countless others. All roads seemed to lead here. Why didn't they leave? Eleanor's face darkened. Because leaving Black Hollow is harder than entering it. Before Daniel could respond, a distant church bell echoed across town. Eleanor immediately stiffened. "We need to go." "Why?" "The bell means evening inspection." "Inspection? You'll see." They returned toward the town center. As they approached, Daniel noticed residents gathering outside their homes. Entire families stood quietly on sidewalks. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Everyone simply waited. The atmosphere felt deeply unsettling. Several minutes later, a group of men appeared. They wore dark coats despite the mild weather. Their expressions were emotionless. Each carried a small notebook. The townspeople lowered their eyes as the men passed. Daniel noticed something else. Fear, genuine fear. Every resident seemed terrified of them. "Who are they?" Daniel whispered. Eleanor's voice dropped. "The Keepers." "The Keepers of what?" "No one knows exactly." The men moved through the streets recording information, checking houses, speaking briefly with residents, writing notes. Their behavior resembled inspectors. Yet there was something far more threatening about them. One of the keepers suddenly stopped, his head turned directly toward Daniel. The man's eyes narrowed. For several seconds they stared at each other. Daniel felt a strange sensation, almost as if the man knew he didn't belong. Then the keeper continued walking. Eleanor released a breath. "That was close." "What was?" "He noticed you." Daniel frowned. "Is that a problem?" Eleanor gave him a look that answered the question. That night, Daniel rented a room above an old inn. The building overlooked the town square. As darkness settled over Black Hollow, fog rolled through the streets. Streetlights cast pale circles across the pavement. The town felt isolated from the rest of reality. Daniel spread his notes across the bed. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. Black Hollow wasn't merely hidden. It was trapped, or perhaps isolated. The distinction mattered. Near midnight, unable to sleep, he approached the window. The streets below were empty, or so he thought. Then he noticed movement. Several figures crossed the square. The keepers, 4 of them, moving silently through the fog. Daniel watched as they approached the statue at the center of town. One of the men unlocked a concealed metal door built into the monument's base. The others disappeared inside. Daniel's pulse quickened, a hidden entrance, beneath the statue. Minutes later, the door closed again. The square returned to silence. Daniel stared at the monument. Questions raced through his mind. What existed beneath it? Why did the keepers visit in secret? And what were they hiding? The following morning, he met Eleanor again. This time, they walked to the edge of town. A hill overlooked Black Hollow from above. The entire settlement spread beneath them. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. Then Eleanor pointed toward the far side of town, a section surrounded by rusted fencing. "What is that?" Daniel asked. "The old archives." His attention sharpened immediately. "The archives?" Eleanor nodded. "Most records are stored there." Daniel's excitement grew. Official records could explain everything: the disappearances, the town's history, the keepers, perhaps even the map itself. Can we get inside? Eleanor remained silent. Can we? It's forbidden. Daniel smiled slightly. That's not what I asked. For the first time, Eleanor smiled back. A small smile. A nervous smile.
Maybe.
Daniel looked toward the fenced compound. His instincts told him the answers were there, hidden among forgotten documents, waiting. But neither of them noticed the figure watching from a distant rooftop. One of the keepers stood perfectly still, observing them through binoculars, and inside his notebook, beneath Daniel's name, he quietly wrote 2 words: "Begin observation." The keeper closed his notebook. From the rooftop, he continued watching Daniel and Eleanor. Neither of them noticed. The fog drifting through Black Hollow concealed him perfectly. By afternoon, Daniel and Eleanor had formed a plan. If answers existed anywhere in town, they would be inside the archives. The challenge was getting inside. The rusted fence surrounding the property stood nearly 10 feet high. Warning signs hung from every section. Most of them had faded with age, yet one message remained visible. Authorized access only. The building itself looked ancient, 3 stories tall, narrow windows, dark stone walls. It resembled a government office from another century. How often do the keepers visit? Daniel asked. Almost every day. And at night? Less often. Daniel nodded. Night would be their opportunity. They waited until darkness settled over Black Hollow. The town became unusually quiet after sunset. Residents disappeared indoors. Curtains closed. Lights dimmed. It felt as though everyone followed an unwritten rule. By 10 o'clock, the streets were nearly empty. Daniel and Eleanor moved through alleyways toward the archives. Fog concealed their approach. The fence proved easier to cross than expected. Several sections had deteriorated badly. Within minutes, they reached the rear entrance. The door was locked. Daniel removed a small toolkit from his backpack. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Investigative writers carry lockpicks now? Only the careful ones. A few moments later, the lock clicked open. The door swung inward. A stale smell drifted out. Dust, old paper, age. They stepped inside. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into darkness. Shelves filled with boxes lined the walls. Thousands of records, perhaps tens of thousands. Daniel's excitement returned. Somewhere inside this building lay the truth. They began searching. Old census reports, property records, photographs, council documents. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Then Daniel found a cabinet labeled 1983. His pulse quickened. The year appeared everywhere in Black Hollow. The newspapers, the monument, the conversations, everything pointed toward it. He opened the drawer. Inside sat dozens of folders. Most appeared untouched. Daniel selected one at random. The document inside froze him. It was a missing persons report. Not from Black Hollow, from the outside world. The report described a man who had vanished in 1983. Attached to it was a photograph. Daniel immediately recognized the face. The man was standing in town earlier that day. Alive, walking through Black Hollow. Daniel slowly lowered the folder. That's impossible. What is? Eleanor asked. Daniel handed her the photograph. Her face paled. He's still here. They exchanged a look. A disturbing realization emerged. The people of Black Hollow weren't all born there. Some had arrived from outside, just like Daniel, and they had never left. They searched deeper. Folder after folder revealed the same pattern. Missing travelers, missing hikers, missing tourists, missing drivers. The decades changed, the names changed, but the outcome remained the same. All roads eventually led to Black Hollow. Then Daniel found something even stranger. A thick file labeled Relocation Event. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The first page contained a date, October 14, 1983. The same date printed on every newspaper. The same date engraved on the monument. The same date everyone believed it still was. He continued reading. The report was incomplete. Several pages had been removed. Others were heavily damaged. Yet fragments survived. Enough fragments. One passage read, "At 9:17 p.m. the boundary stabilized." Another stated, "Communication with the outside has ceased." Further down, the relocation appears permanent. Daniel's heart pounded. What does relocation mean? Eleanor shook her head. I don't know. The next surviving page contained a list. Names. Hundreds of names. Every resident of Black Hollow. At the bottom, one final sentence had been typed. Daniel read it aloud. The town has successfully crossed. Silence filled the room. Neither understood what it meant, but both knew it mattered. A sudden noise echoed somewhere in the building. A door slammed. Daniel froze. Eleanor's eyes widened. Someone else was inside. Footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate, approaching. Daniel quickly switched off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. The footsteps continued. Closer, closer, closer. A beam of light suddenly swept across nearby shelves. Someone was searching. Daniel carefully peeked around a cabinet. His stomach tightened. A keeper. The man moved between rows of records, flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other. Daniel pulled back immediately. The keeper was far too close. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed, a terrible silence. Then a voice emerged from the darkness. Calm, cold, certain. I know you're here. Eleanor's breathing became shallow. Daniel remained motionless. The flashlight beam moved slowly through the room. The keeper continued speaking. You should have left when you arrived. The light passed only feet away. Daniel could hear the man's footsteps clearly now. One step, then another, then another. The keeper suddenly stopped beside a nearby cabinet. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then he spoke again. This town protects itself. Daniel felt sweat running down his neck. The flashlight beam began moving toward their hiding place. A few more feet, and they would be discovered. Without warning, Eleanor grabbed Daniel's arm. She pointed toward a narrow staircase hidden behind shelves. An escape route, their only chance. The flashlight continued approaching. The keeper was almost upon them. Daniel took a breath. Then he and Eleanor slipped silently toward the staircase. Behind them, the keeper's light reached the empty cabinet where they had been hiding, seconds earlier. A long pause followed. Then Daniel heard the man's voice echo through the archives. This time it sounded almost amused. Run. Daniel and Eleanor raced up the narrow staircase. The old wooden steps groaned beneath their feet. Behind them, the keeper's flashlight beam swept across the archive room. For a moment, Daniel expected alarms to sound, or more keepers to appear. Neither happened. Only silence followed. That somehow felt worse. They reached the upper floor and hurried through a maze of dark corridors. Dust covered everything. Broken furniture filled abandoned offices. The entire level appeared untouched for decades. Finally, they found an emergency exit. The rusted door opened onto a rear alley. Cold night air hit their faces. Without stopping, they disappeared into the fog. Only after putting several streets between themselves and the archives did they slow down. Eleanor leaned against a wall, breathing heavily. Daniel looked back. No one was following them, at least not visibly. What was that file? He asked. Eleanor shook her head. I've never heard of a relocation event, but everyone here acts like it's still 1983. I know. Daniel remembered the report. The town has successfully crossed. The sentence refused to leave his mind. Crossed what? Into what? They needed answers. And according to Eleanor, there was only one place left to search. The old church, the oldest building in Black Hollow. The place most residents avoided. The next evening they met again near the edge of town. Fog drifted between gravestones as they approached the church. The building stood atop a hill overlooking Black Hollow. Its stone walls were cracked. Its bell tower leaned slightly. Unlike the rest of town, it looked genuinely abandoned. No services happen here anymore, Daniel asked. Not for many years. Why? Eleanor hesitated. My grandfather used to say that church remembers things the town wants to forget. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? He never explained. The heavy wooden doors opened with surprising ease. Inside, dust covered the pews. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows. The silence felt ancient. Daniel walked toward the altar. Everything appeared ordinary, until he noticed deep scratches on the stone floor. Lines, hundreds of them, as though heavy objects had repeatedly been dragged across the room. The marks led behind the altar, toward a large stone slab. Eleanor knelt beside it. Her fingers brushed away years of dust. A metal ring emerged. Help me. Together they pulled. The slab shifted slowly. A hidden passage opened beneath it. Cold air rose from the darkness below. Daniel stared into the opening. Stone steps descended deep underground. Has anyone been down there? He asked. Eleanor's expression answered the question. No one. Not for a very long time. Daniel switched on his flashlight. The beam disappeared into darkness. Then they began descending. The staircase seemed endless, 20 steps, 30, 40. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Eventually the stairs ended. A vast tunnel stretched before them. The walls were lined with old electrical cables and rusted pipes. This wasn't a medieval passage. Someone had built this place deliberately, far below the church. Far below Black Hollow, they followed the tunnel. Minutes later, it opened into an enormous underground chamber. Daniel stopped in disbelief. Rows of machinery filled the room. Massive generators, control panels, miles of wiring, everything coated in dust, yet somehow still intact. "What is this place?" Eleanor whispered. Daniel slowly approached one of the machines. A faded label remained attached. His heart began racing. The label read, "Black Hollow Transition Project." Neither spoke. The words alone were terrifying. Transition, relocation, crossed. The same ideas appeared again and again. Daniel continued exploring. At the far end of the chamber stood dozens of filing cabinets. Most had rusted shut. One remained open. Inside were journals, dozens of them. Daniel selected the oldest. The first page was dated 1983. He began reading. The journal belonged to a scientist, or perhaps an engineer. The entries described an experiment, a project funded in secret, a project beneath Black Hollow. As Daniel flipped through the pages, the truth slowly emerged. The town had not disappeared accidentally. Someone had made it disappear. The final entries became increasingly desperate. One passage caught his attention immediately. The crossing succeeded beyond expectations. Another read, "The town remains intact." Then came a final entry. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, terrified. "We cannot reverse it." Daniel stared at the sentence. A knot formed in his stomach. The next page contained only 3 words. Something came through. Nothing followed. No explanation. No details. The journal ended there. Silence filled the underground chamber. Eleanor slowly stepped backward. What came through? Daniel wished he knew. Then a distant sound echoed through the tunnels. A metallic clang. Both froze. Another clang followed. Closer. Someone was down here. Daniel switched off his flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber. The sound continued. Slow footsteps, approaching through the tunnel. One step, then another, then another. Daniel and Eleanor hid behind a row of generators. The footsteps entered the chamber. A flashlight beam appeared. Sweeping slowly across the room, Daniel peeked around the machinery. His stomach tightened. 3 keepers, not 1. 3. The men moved through the chamber as if they knew exactly where to search. One stopped beside the open cabinet. He examined the missing journal. Then he looked directly toward the generators, toward Daniel's hiding place. The keeper smiled. A small smile. The smile of someone who had expected them to be there all along. Then he spoke. "You've learned more than any outsider before you. The flashlight beam locked onto their position. And now you've reached the part where nobody leaves." The flashlight beam remained fixed on Daniel and Eleanor. Neither moved. The 3 keepers stood at the entrance to the underground chamber. Their faces were calm, almost confident, as though the outcome had already been decided. The keeper in the center took a step forward. "You've seen the journals." Daniel remained silent. "You've read the records." Another step. "You know Black Hollow was never supposed to survive." The words echoed through the chamber. Daniel slowly emerged from behind the generators. Eleanor followed reluctantly. "What happened here?" Daniel demanded. The keeper studied him for several seconds. Then, unexpectedly, he answered. "In 1983, a group of scientists arrived in Black Hollow." His voice was steady. They believed reality was far less stable than people imagined. Daniel remembered the journals, the transition project, the relocation event, the crossing, all of it connected. "They built machines beneath the town," the keeper continued. "Machines designed to move Black Hollow beyond ordinary space." Eleanor stared at him. "Why would anyone do that?" "To prove it could be done." The answer chilled Daniel. The keeper continued. "The experiment succeeded." Daniel's heart pounded. "The town disappeared." "No." The keeper shook his head. "The town remained exactly where it was." "Then what changed?" The man's eyes darkened. "Everything else." Silence filled the chamber. Daniel struggled to process the statement. The keeper walked toward one of the abandoned machines. His fingers brushed across its rusted surface. The experiment separated Black Hollow from the world. The words hung heavily in the air. We exist beside reality. Daniel felt a chill spread through him. Another dimension. The keeper considered the question. Not exactly. Then what? A place between. The answer only deepened the mystery. The keeper sighed. For decades we survived here. Trapped, the man nodded. Trapped. For the first time, genuine sadness appeared on his face. Daniel realized something. The keepers weren't merely guards. They were prisoners too. Then Daniel remembered the final journal entry. Something came through. His expression hardened. What entered Black Hollow? The keeper's face immediately changed. The sadness vanished. Fear replaced it. Real fear. No one spoke. Even the other keepers seemed uncomfortable. Daniel stepped closer. What came through? The man looked away. That question should remain unanswered. Why? Because knowing changes everything. Daniel's pulse quickened. Tell me. The keeper remained silent. Then Eleanor suddenly spoke. The map. Everyone turned toward her. The map keeps finding people. The keeper slowly nodded. Yes. Why? The man's expression became grim. Because the town needs replacements. Silence crashed over the chamber. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Replacements. The word carried terrible implications. Replacements for who? The keeper looked directly at him. For those who disappear. A cold sensation moved through Daniel. You mean the missing visitors? The keeper nodded. And the residents? Daniel frowned. The residents disappear too? Sometimes. The keeper's voice was barely above a whisper. Something takes them. The underground chamber felt colder than ever. Daniel remembered the journal. Something came through. For the first time he understood. The experiment had not simply trapped Black Hollow. It had opened a door, and something on the other side still existed, the keeper continued. When people vanish, the map leaves. Daniel listened carefully. It finds someone new, someone curious, someone willing to follow it. Daniel slowly looked down. The realization struck him like a blow. The map had chosen him, not by chance, not by coincidence, deliberately. The antique shop, the old owner, the warning, everything had been part of the same chain. The map moved from person to person, generation after generation, leading new arrivals into Black Hollow, feeding the town, maintaining its population. Daniel felt sick. The disappearances weren't random. They were part of a system, a cycle that had continued for decades. Then another realization struck him, a far worse one. What happened to the antique shop owner? The keeper's expression darkened. He was the previous keeper of the map. Daniel's heart raced. Where is he now? No answer came. The silence was answer enough. The old man was gone. Just another victim. Just another replacement. A distant rumble suddenly echoed through the tunnels. The keepers immediately looked alarmed. The sound grew louder. Like thunder beneath the earth, the machinery around them began vibrating. Dust fell from the ceiling. Eleanor stepped backward. What's happening? For the first time, genuine panic appeared on the keepers' faces. One of them whispered a single word. Boundary. The rumbling intensified. Lights flickered across old control panels that had been dead for decades. Machines began activating on their own. A low mechanical hum filled the chamber. Daniel stared in disbelief. The equipment was waking up. By itself, the central keeper turned toward him. His voice was urgent now. No more questions. What is this? The boundary is shifting. The floor trembled violently. Somewhere deep in the darkness beyond the chamber, something moved. Not machinery, not a person. Something else. A distant sound drifted through the tunnels. A sound unlike anything Daniel had ever heard. Part whisper, part scream, part echo. The keepers immediately went pale. One of them dropped his flashlight. Eleanor grabbed Daniel's arm. We need to leave. Daniel didn't argue. For the first time since entering Black Hollow, fear overwhelmed curiosity. Whatever had made that sound, the keepers were terrified of it, and that terrified him. As they hurried toward the tunnel, the central keeper called after them. His voice echoed through the chamber. Find the arch before sunrise. Daniel stopped. What? The keeper looked directly at him. If the boundary closes again, another terrible sound echoed through the darkness. Closer this time, much closer. The keeper's face drained of color. Then he shouted, You'll never leave Black Hollow. Daniel and Eleanor ran. The tunnel shook beneath their feet. Behind them, the underground chamber echoed with mechanical noises and distant, unnatural sounds. The old machines continued waking up. Lights flashed across rusted control panels. Warning alarms that had been silent for decades suddenly began screaming through the darkness. Neither Daniel nor Eleanor looked back. The keeper's final warning repeated in Daniel's mind. Find the arch before sunrise. The tunnel seemed longer now, much longer, as though the distance itself had changed. The air grew colder with every step. Then the strange sound came again. Closer, far closer, a low whispering chorus, hundreds of voices speaking at once. None of the words were understandable, yet Daniel somehow knew they weren't human. Eleanor tightened her grip on his arm. Don't listen. What? The voices. Daniel realized he had been unconsciously slowing down, listening, trying to understand. He forced himself forward. Minutes later, they emerged from the church. The town was no longer quiet. Residents filled the streets, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, standing motionless, watching. No one spoke, no one moved. The fog drifted between them like a living thing. Daniel felt a chill. Something had changed. The people no longer looked frightened. They looked resigned, as if they knew what was coming. Then the church bell began ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound rolled across Black Hollow. Every resident slowly turned toward Daniel. Every single one. A wave of dread swept through him. Eleanor whispered a single word. Run! They sprinted down the street. The crowd did not chase them. Instead, people calmly stepped into their path, blocking roads, closing shortcuts, guiding them away from the town's edge, almost as if the entire town was working together, trying to keep them inside. Daniel and Eleanor changed direction repeatedly, yet every route seemed wrong. Roads that had existed yesterday were gone. Intersections led somewhere else. Buildings appeared where empty lots should have been. The town itself was changing. Daniel stopped briefly. This street wasn't here before. I know. Eleanor looked terrified. It's happening again. What is? The shifting. Daniel remembered the keeper's words. The boundary is shifting. The entire town seemed to be rearranging itself, reality bending around them. They continued running. The fog thickened. Visibility dropped. Soon they could barely see 20 feet ahead. Then Daniel noticed something disturbing. The fog contained shadows, moving shadows, shapes that didn't belong to any person. Tall, thin, impossible. Whenever he looked directly at them, they vanished. Yet they remained visible at the edge of his vision, watching, following, waiting. The whispering voices returned, closer than ever. Daniel fought the urge to stop, to listen, to turn around. Eleanor suddenly pointed ahead. The square. They emerged into the town center. The statue stood in the middle of the fog. But something was wrong. The hidden door beneath it was open, wide open. Darkness filled the opening, and standing beside it were the 3 keepers. The central keeper stepped forward. His face was pale, exhausted, as if he had aged years since their last meeting. You still have time. Daniel approached cautiously. What's happening? The keeper looked toward the surrounding fog. His expression hardened. The thing that entered Black Hollow. Daniel's pulse quickened. What is it? The keeper shook his head. I don't know. The answer surprised him. You don't know? No one does. The whispering voices echoed again. Even the keepers flinched. The man continued. It doesn't belong here. What does it want? The keeper looked directly at Daniel. To be remembered. A cold sensation spread through him. The answer felt wrong, yet somehow true. The town keeps it trapped, Daniel asked. The keeper nodded. For decades. And now? The man looked towards the sky. The fog above Black Hollow seemed to twist unnaturally. The boundary is weakening. Daniel finally understood. The town itself had become a prison. Not just for its residents, for whatever had crossed over during the experiment. The keeper pointed toward the northern road. The arch is still open. Still? It won't remain that way. Without another word, Daniel and Eleanor ran. This time the keepers did not stop them. They followed. The 4 of them moving together through the shifting town, past silent houses, past empty shops, past frightened residents watching from windows. The road toward the forest appeared ahead. Daniel felt hope for the first time. Then the whispering stopped. Instantly, the sudden silence felt worse. Everyone froze. The keepers turned slowly. Looking toward the fog, Daniel followed their gaze. A figure stood in the distance, barely visible, tall, motionless, human-shaped, yet not human. The fog around it moved unnaturally, as though avoiding contact. No face could be seen, no features, only darkness. The central keeper whispered something under his breath. A prayer, or perhaps a warning. The figure took one step forward. The ground trembled. Another step. The fog thickened instantly. Daniel felt an overwhelming urge to walk toward it, to listen, to remember something he had never known. Eleanor grabbed his hand. The sensation broke immediately. "Don't look at it." They ran again. Behind them, the keepers remained, standing between the figure and the road. The central keeper turned toward Daniel one final time. Their eyes met across the distance. Then the keeper nodded. A silent farewell. Daniel understood. The man wasn't coming with them. None of them were. The keepers had chosen to stay, to hold the line, to buy time. The road curved through the forest. Ahead, through the fog, the stone arch finally appeared. Daniel's heart surged. Freedom, escape, home. But as they approached, Eleanor suddenly stopped. Daniel turned. She wasn't moving. The fog swirled around her feet. Her expression had changed. Fear, sadness, acceptance. And Daniel realized something terrible. Eleanor wasn't looking at the arch. She was looking back toward Black Hollow, as though something there was calling her name. "Eleanor!" Daniel grabbed her arm. "Come on!" For a moment she didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the fog-covered town behind them. The whispers had returned, soft, distant, calling. Daniel couldn't hear words, but Eleanor clearly could. A tear rolled down her cheek. "They want me to stay." Daniel tightened his grip. "No." Her expression broke his heart. "I was born here." "You can still leave." Eleanor slowly shook her head. "You don't understand." The fog around Black Hollow thickened. The town seemed farther away now, and yet somehow closer, as if reality itself were folding around it. Daniel pulled her toward the arch. "We're leaving." For the first time, Eleanor smiled. A small, sad smile. "Only one of us is." Daniel froze. Before he could react, Eleanor stepped backward, out of his reach. "Eleanor!" she continued, retreating. The fog swallowed her ankles, then her legs, then her entire figure. "No!" Daniel rushed forward. But something invisible stopped him, a force like a wall. He pushed against it. Nothing happened. Eleanor stood beyond it, calm, peaceful, as though she had already made her choice. "Thank you for trying," she said. Daniel felt helpless. There has to be another way. Eleanor looked toward the distant town. Lights glowed through the fog, the last lights of Black Hollow. "The town won't let me go." Her voice was almost a whisper now. "And if I leave, something else might." Daniel understood. The prison still needed its prisoners. Someone had to remain. Someone always remained. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "Go." The force surrounding her grew stronger. The fog rose higher. "Eleanor, go, Daniel." The archway began trembling. Stone cracked. Ancient dust fell from above. The opening was closing. Daniel looked from the arch to Eleanor, back to the arch, then back again. He knew the truth. If he waited any longer, both of them would be trapped forever. Eleanor smiled one last time. Then the fog swallowed her completely. She was gone. Daniel stood alone. The whispers grew louder. The forest shook, and somewhere behind him something screamed. The sound wasn't human. It echoed through the valley like a warning. Daniel ran. He crossed beneath the stone arch. The instant he did, the world exploded into motion. Birds sang. Wind rushed through the trees. His watch started ticking again. His GPS flashed back to life. The silence that had surrounded Black Hollow vanished. Daniel collapsed onto the forest floor, breathing heavily. For several minutes he simply lay there, trying to understand what had happened. Eventually he stood. The stone arch remained behind him, but beyond it there was no road, no fog, no sign of Black Hollow, only ordinary forest. The town had disappeared, as though it had never existed. Weeks later, Daniel returned home. The world continued as normal. Cars filled the streets. News reports played on television. People lived their lives. No one knew about Black Hollow. No one would believe it. Daniel wrote everything down. Every detail, every conversation, every discovery. He filled hundreds of pages. Yet something felt unfinished. Something remained unresolved. One rainy evening, nearly a month after his escape, Daniel unlocked the cabinet where he had stored the antique map. He intended to place it inside a secure archive, somewhere it could never hurt anyone again. But the moment he unrolled the parchment, his blood turned cold. The map had changed. Daniel stared in disbelief. The original red circle around Black Hollow remained, But another red circle had appeared, fresh, bright, as though it had been drawn yesterday. Daniel stepped closer, his hands trembled. The new circle surrounded a town, a real town, a town he knew very well, his hometown, the place where he had grown up, the place where he lived now. Daniel's heart pounded. Slowly he looked toward the bottom corner of the map. Words were appearing there, letters forming across the parchment, as if an invisible hand were writing them. Daniel watched in horror. The sentence completed itself. The next crossing has been selected outside. Thunder rolled across the sky. Daniel looked back at the map. The red circle seemed darker now, larger, growing, and for the first time since escaping Black Hollow, he understood the terrible truth. Black Hollow had never been the destination. It had only been the beginning.